Welcome to Happy, Healthy, Whole, and Rich, where faith meets action and transformation is non negotiable. I'm Tina Brinkley Potts, and I believe now is the time to step boldly into your power, walk in divine wisdom, and claim the life you were meant to live. Each episode, I'll bring you real, unfiltered truth because this world needs leaders who refuse to shrink. Let's get it. Welcome back to Happy, Healthy, Whole, and Rich. I'm Tina Brinkley Potts, and I want to remind you, I know who I play for and so do you. Over the last few days, we've been standing inside the law of attraction and the law of polarity, looking at what you're holding on to with your attention and how that attention shapes what comes back to you. Today, I want to bring you a law that works right alongside those two. But it operates a little differently, and I think it's one that most people misunderstand the fastest. Today's law is the law of inspired action. Here's why I think it gets misunderstood. Most people hear law of action and they picture strategy, a plan, funnels, a 5-step process with a spreadsheet behind it. That's not what inspired action is. Inspired action is a nudge, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a loud, uncomfortable pull towards something that, on paper, makes no strategic sense, no clear return, no obvious payoff. Sometimes it even looks like the opposite of a smart move. And I want to tell you a story today about a time I followed one of those nudges because it changed the trajectory of my business, and I still can't fully explain it on paper why it worked. Instead of telling you a client story this time, this one's about me. We were deep in the pandemic. I don't have to describe that season to you. You lived it too, whatever version of it looked like. Mine looked a lot like stillness, a lot of quiet. I stayed home. The only place I really went to was the grocery store. A lot of hours that used to be filled with travel and in-person client work suddenly just open. And I remember sitting with that stillness and feeling a real, genuine pull to be useful with the time I now had. Not to fill it with noise, to use it for something. Around that same time, I came across a post online. Someone was looking for help managing a Facebook group. Nothing glamorous about it. No pay attached. No promise of anything on the back end. Just a plain ask for a volunteer to help moderate and manage a community online. But here's the thing. I don't do that at all. That's not my thing. But I was truly passionate about what the group was about. It wasn't adjacent to my business, and it wasn't some kind of strategic funnel or anything I was building. I just genuinely cared about it personally for its own sake. So I responded. I told her I could devote 2 to 4 hours a week to helping manage the group for free. No contract, no negotiation, no what's in it for me conversation. I want you to really sit with that because if you'd asked me to justify that decision using pure business strategy, I couldn't have. I already had a business. I already had clients, and I didn't need any new unpaid part-time volunteer role eating into the hours that a strategist would have told me to protect. I would have told my clients to protect it. There was no 5-year plan that had, manage a Facebook, stranger's Facebook at that for free, written anywhere in it. But it wasn't a strategic decision. It was an inspired one. Something in me said yes before my business brain had the chance to run the numbers and talk me out of it. And I've learned over the years of doing this work that when that particular kind of pull shows up, the kind that doesn't fully make sense on paper but won't leave you alone until you act on it, that pull is worth listening to, even when, and especially when, it's scary because it's counterintuitive. So I showed up 2 to 4 hours a week, week after week, doing the unglamorous work of moderating a community, approving posts, keeping the conversation on track, handling the small conflicts that come up in any group of real people talking about something they care about. Nothing about it looked like a business strategy. It looked, from the outside, exactly like what it was: a woman giving her time away for free because the subject mattered to her. And here's where the story turns. The owner of that group, the woman who had put out the original ask, got to know me over those weeks and months, not through a sales pitch, through actually working alongside me, watching how I showed up, watching how I handled the group, watching who I was when nobody was paying me to perform. And at some point, she introduced me to her brother. That introduction, one relationship born entirely out of unpaid, inspired volunteer work, brought me several clients. Real, paying, long-term clients. Clients I would have never met through any outbound strategy I could have designed on purpose. I did not build a marketing funnel that led to that introduction. And I didn't network my way into that room with intention. I just answered a nudge that had nothing to do with lead generation. And lead generation happened anyway, as a byproduct of the obedience to do something that made no strategic sense in the moment. I don't want you to hear this story and think I had some secret confidence the whole time that it would pay off. I didn't. There were weeks in the middle of that volunteer stretch where I genuinely wondered, okay, what was I doing giving hours away that I could have been spending somewhere else? I didn't take that action because I could see the ending. I took it because the pull to do it was louder than my ability to justify it. And I had learned by that point in my life to trust that particular kind of pull, even when I couldn't see where it led. I also remember the specific moment I almost talked myself out of it. It may be 6 or 7 weeks in, and I caught myself doing the math one evening, literally sitting there thinking about how many billable hours I'd given away for free that month and what that time could have looked like applied somewhere with an obvious return. That's the strategist in me, and I don't think she's wrong to ask that question. But underneath the math, there was a quieter, steadier feeling that hadn't moved at all. The same pull that got me to respond to the post in the first place. I sat with both of those voices for a night, the calculating one and the quiet one, and I chose to keep listening to the quiet one, mostly because it hadn't once wavered, even while my logic kept trying to talk it down. That's usually how I've learned to tell the difference between a nudge worth following and a whim worth ignoring. A whim fades the second you question it. A real nudge just sits there, patient, unmoved by your doubt, waiting for you to come back around to it. That's the whole lesson of inspired action. It rarely announces its own payoff in advance. If it did, it wouldn't require faith. It would just be strategy wearing a costume. Inspired action asks you to move before the spreadsheet agrees with you. Turn with me to Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. I have read this verse most of my life because I understood it differently once I lived that Facebook group season. Lean not unto thine own understanding. It's not a verse telling you to be reckless or to abandon wisdom. It's a verse telling you that your own understanding, your own strategic brain, your own spreadsheet logic is not always going to be able to see the whole path in advance. If it could, you wouldn't need to trust anything beyond it. The verse is preparing you for exactly the kind of moment I had. A nudge that made no sense to my own understanding, that I had to act on anyway, in acknowledgement of something directing the path that I could not see yet. I also want to bring in James 2:17. Even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. This is the verse that keeps inspired action honest, because it would be easy to talk about listening for a nudge as something purely internal, a feeling you have and nothing more. But James is clear. Faith without the corresponding action is dead. It doesn't produce anything. I couldn't have felt that pull towards the Facebook group and simply noticed it, appreciated it, and scrolled on. The feeling alone would have changed nothing. It was the action, showing up for 2 to 4 hours a week for free, for months, that gave the inspired nudge somewhere to land and something to produce. Let's talk about what the law of inspired action teaches, because I think it's often confused with two other things that sound familiar but aren't the same. It is not the same as the law of attraction. Attraction is about the frequency you're holding, the belief you're broadcasting, the climate your desires land in. We spent 2 full days on that. Inspired action is what you do in response to a specific individual prompt that arises out of that climate. Attraction sets the field. Inspired action is the single specific step you take when something in that field taps you on the shoulder and says, now, this, go. It's also not the same as hustle. Hustle says, do more, try harder, take action constantly, keep moving, because motion itself will eventually produce a result. Inspired action is almost the opposite posture. It requires stillness first, enough quiet, enough listening that you can distinguish the specific nudge from the general noise of I should be doing something. I want you to notice that in my own story, the nudge only became audible because I was sitting in genuine stillness during the pandemic. If I had kept myself busy and as noisy as I normally would have, I don't know that I would have heard that post the way I heard it. The stillness wasn't wasted time before the real work started. The stillness was the instrument that let me hear the instruction clearly enough to follow it. Abraham Hicks is where the term inspired action itself comes from. And it's worth being precise about what they mean by it, because it's easy to flatten it into just do what feels good. Abraham's teaching draws a hard line between 3 kinds of action. Action that's forced out of fear or obligation. An action that merely motivated by willpower. An inspired action, the move you make when you're not fighting yourself, when your energy is clean and your mind isn't screaming 5 conflicting things at once. Abraham's teaching is that inspired action feels light and almost obvious, never forced, which lines up exactly with what I felt the moment I read that Facebook group post. There was no internal wrestling match before I said yes. It was closer to relief than effort. Neville Goddard never used the phrase inspired action, but his entire teaching rests on a related idea, that the inner state comes first, and the outer world rearranges itself to meet it, often through people you haven't met yet, doing things you couldn't have arranged yourself. Neville taught that once you've genuinely occupied the feeling of a wish already fulfilled, the specific people needed to bring it to pass will show up on their own without needing to be recruited or convinced. I didn't have to engineer an introduction to that group owner's brother. I just had to occupy the action fully and let the rest arrange itself the way Neville taught it always does once the inner assumption is settled. And Reverend Ike, in his own direct, no-nonsense way, taught something that keeps this whole law from turning into passive waiting. Reverend Ike was relentless about the idea that whatever you give your attention and belief to, you become. And that belief without corresponding real-world action was, in his mind, just wishful thinking dressed up in spiritual language. He wasn't a sit and meditate on it teacher. He was a believe it, then get up and work teacher. That's the check and balance inspired action needs. The nudge tells you where to move. Reverend Ike's teaching is the reminder that you still have to move. Showing up, hours logged, work done, or the nudge just stays a nice feeling you had one afternoon and nothing more. Put those three next to each other and you get the full shape of the law. Abraham Hicks tells you how to recognize a true inspired nudge versus a forced hustle. Neville Goddard tells you why you don't have to orchestrate the outcome yourself once you've acted on it. And Reverend Ike tells you that none of it means anything until you get up and do the thing. Here's the part I really want you to understand, because it's the part that makes this law feel counterintuitive and, frankly, a little uncomfortable to teach. Inspired action almost never asks you to do the thing that makes obvious strategic sense. If it did, you wouldn't need a spiritual law to explain it. You just call it good business planning. Inspired action, by its nature, tends to ask you to move towards something that looks, from a purely logical standpoint, like a poor use of your time or resources. Give away hours for free when you already have paying clients. Show up for a stranger's community with no promise of anything in return. Say yes to a thing that doesn't pencil out on a spreadsheet because something underneath the spreadsheet is asking you to. And this is where inspired action and attraction actually work together, even though they're not the same law. Because I had, at that point in my life, already begun to do real work on shifting my own relationship to scarcity and control, some of which I shared with you in earlier episodes. My instrument, so to speak, was tuned to actually receive that nudge and trust it, instead of diminishing it the way I might have years earlier, when my grip on the prove it first end of the stick was tighter. Attraction had shifted my climate. Inspired action was the specific move that climate produced an opportunity for, and my willingness to take that move without needing to see the whole outcome first is what led the opportunity to complete itself. I also want to talk about the flip side of this teaching, because I don't want anyone listening to hear, give your time away for free and clients will appear, as if this were the formula. It isn't a formula. Not every unpaid nudge leads to an introduction, a client, a turning point. Some inspired actions simply produce the growth of showing up, the relationships built for their own sake, the satisfaction of being useful, nothing more, and that is enough on its own. The lesson isn't do this specific thing and expect this specific outcome. The lesson is, When a nudge arrives that doesn't make strategic sense but won't leave you alone, that nudge deserves your obedience regardless of whether you can trace the payoff in advance. Sometimes the payoff is a brother who becomes a client. Sometimes the payoff is simply who you became by saying yes. Both are the law working. You don't get to demand which version you receive. Now, I want to give you one more distinction because it's the one that trips people up the most when they are trying to apply everything we just talked about. Not every strong internal pull is guidance. Some of it is conditioning wearing guidance's clothes. Guidance and conditioning can feel remarkably similar in the moment. Both show up as a pull, a strong internal yes or no, a feeling that seems to come from somewhere deeper than ordinary thought. But they come from two completely different places, and they lead you into two completely different directions. Guidance is quiet. It's usually a little inconvenient, and this is the part people miss. It doesn't argue with you. It just sits there, patient, the way I described earlier, unmoved by your doubt, waiting for you to come back around to it. Conditioning is loud. It reacts. It's built from old fear, old scarcity, old proof that you learn to expect a certain outcome because it happened before. And it dresses itself up as instinct so you won't question it. Conditioning says don't, not safe, you'll regret this, and it says it fast with urgency, the way fear always talks. Guidance rarely raises its voice. Conditioning almost always does. Here's the test I've learned to use on myself. Conditioning is usually protecting me from something that already happened to me before. Guidance is usually inviting me towards something that hasn't happened yet. One is a rerun. The other is new information. When I sat with the Facebook group Nudge, even while my strategist brain was doing the math on lost billable hours, the pull itself never once sounded like fear. It didn't say you'll regret this. It just quietly kept saying yes. That's usually how you'll know which one you're listening to. Now, let's sit with a pen in your hand for this part. Don't just listen, write. Number 1. What is a nudge I felt recently that made no strategic sense? And have I dismissed it because I couldn't justify it on the spreadsheet first? Number 2. Proverbs 3, 5 through 6 says to lean not on my own understanding. Where in my life am I currently demanding to see the whole path before I take the first step? Number 3. James 2:17 says faith without works is dead. What is one inspired nudge I felt but not yet acted on? And what is the smallest possible action I could take on it this week? Number 4. When was the last time I created enough stillness in my life to hear a nudge clearly instead of drowning it out with busyness and hustle? Number 5. Think of a time I called something intuition that turned out to be old fear wearing a disguise. Looking back, what gave it away? Was it loud, urgent, or rooted in something that had already hurt me before? Number 6. Is there a nudge I've been dismissing as reckless or impractical that on a closer look has stayed quiet and steady rather than loud and reactive? The mark of real guidance rather than conditioning. Number 7. Where in my life has fear successfully disguised itself as wisdom or caution? And what did believing that disguise cost me? Right until something uncomfortable shows up. That discomfort is usually where the real work is. Here's what I want to leave you with. The nudge that doesn't make sense is not a distraction from your purpose. More often than not, it is your purpose arriving in a form your strategic mind hasn't learned to recognize yet. I did not manage that Facebook group because I calculated a return. I did it because something in me said yes before I could talk myself out of it. And I have learned again and again that the pulls I can't fully explain are usually the ones worth trusting the most. You don't need to see the whole path today. You need to notice the nudge you've been talking yourself out of and take one small, obedient step towards it. Not because you can prove where it leads, but because it hasn't stopped tapping you on the shoulder, and that persistence is information too. Stay happy, stay healthy, stay whole, and stay rich in understanding that this is all you. So it's time to do right by you. If this episode is stirring something in you, do me a favor. Share it with someone. Let someone rewrite the pact that they have unconsciously made with lack. I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same truth, same walk towards more. This is Happy, Healthy, Whole, and Rich, and we're just getting started. If this message spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, live it, and let's grow together. Head over to happyhealthywholerich.com for more powerful teachings and join the movement. Remember, your breakthrough is waiting. You have to show up. Until the next time, stay happy, healthy, whole, and rich.